I am mentally ill. So imagine my joy when I heard that RimWorld was getting a new DLC that not only overhauled space exploration, but also revamped the trading system. With the new updates, it's become easier than ever to make boatloads of money. So that's our goal today. We're going to become a millionaire and escape the planet with just one colonist. On the way, we'll betray, rob, and commit unspeakable crimes against God and man on our way to becoming a RIMMILLIONAIRE. We started in an idyllic meadow, where someone noticed the beautiful rolling hills, the abundant flora and fauna, and the friendly wildlife. I instead noticed prime real estate. I mean, come on, an untainted river and abundant natural resources? I could not imagine a better place to build a factory. I chose to start as the Mechanitor, a reclusive dickhead whose only friends are, robots. It sounds like it would be a pain to work with, but it actually starts with one very important piece of research unlocked: microelectronics. To start making real cash, we're going to need to build two things. One, a comms console to trade with people, and two, a trading terminal to take contracts. .6 introduced new trading mechanics which allow us to take contracts. If we supply a certain amount of items to a faction by a certain time, we get a big reward, often being tens of thousands of silver. The plan was to use that as our main moneymaker while gaming the stock market to push our already high net value even higher. Shortly after we built the trading terminal, I came to a sudden realization. Our mechs produce pollution. They produce pollution when they recharge, when they're created, and sometimes they just produce pollution when they feel like it because they fucking suck. That was going to be an issue. Realistically, there were two things I could have done here. I could get Goon, our colonist, to haul our pollution away from the colony and dump it there, or, like a responsible business owner, I could dump our pollution into a nearby river to save a few bucks. You can imagine which one I went with. We were starting to get an increasing number of visitors, and it was beginning to make me a little annoyed. I was hoping we'd get a bunch of raiders in the early game that I could then harvest organs from to make a quick buck, but thus far we'd just been getting visitors wanting to trade and talk with us. Our luck turned around almost immediately after I began complaining loudly as Randy graced us with an Etekin raider. Lady Luck was clearly smiling upon us, as a small trading caravan had arrived hours prior, and with a little bit of elbow grease, I was able to lead the attacker into the traders and have them do the fighting for me. Even better, the raider actually managed to knock down the person carrying all the trading goods, meaning that legally everything that they had on them now belonged to us. This was truly the best outcome. My enthusiasm was then tempered swiftly by a realization. We had air conditioning unlocked from the start, meaning we could have been freezing our waste packs this entire time instead of contaminating our nearby river. That was a bit of an oopsie, but it ultimately didn't affect our stock price, so I just kind of moved on. The days began to drag on as I waited for a certain quest. As boredom set in, I decided to do a little trolling. The ideology I'd made for my colonists allowed organ harvesting, and a few wild men had wandered into our territory a couple of days ago, meaning we had a prime opportunity to make some quick cash. Like a true business-minded alpha, I grabbed the first homeless guy I saw and began to cut him up to get his sweet, sweet organs. Unfortunately, I made a bit of a miscalculation. The man I grabbed actually had a custom xenotype, meaning that he exploded on death. I found this out at an unfortunate moment. What the fuck? What the fuck? He just exploded! After that was dealt with, we got a quest from the Empire. Some guy wanted us to take care of his disabled bird for a week, and in return we get some honor, hopefully allowing us to get a psycast. Psycasts essentially give us psychic abilities, and while they're kinda useful in vanilla RimWorld, they're vital here, because I have the Psycast's expanded mod installed, allowing us to, with a little bit of elbow grease, turn Goon into a wizard. But we weren't there yet. Before that happened, we'd have to deal with this stupid duck. In the meantime, I was beginning to get bored, and I noticed we'd spawned near an ancient danger. Typically, you don't want to investigate these until a little later in the playthrough, as they sometimes have a threat inside strong enough to wipe out the colony, but all of that went out the window in the face of my insurmountable boredom. So I started building some spike traps leading out of the ancient danger. Shortly after that started, the duck quest completed itself, and we didn't actually get a psycast. Turns out I miscalculated how much honor we needed to get our first one, and we essentially did that duck quest for nothing. That sent me into a manic depression, which I was thankfully pulled out of almost immediately by a bulk goods trader who sold us 31 components. Our lucky streak continued after a trader sold us some medicine and a creature one might consider to be an underage human, all for about $400. Just to clear up the math, we're able to make about $2,000 by harvesting this kid's organs and selling the rest of him for his constituent parts. Truly, we live a blessed life. Eventually, after a few hours of sitting and waiting, I had created the death tube, and had made some armor-piercing ammo for Goon. With these advancements, I felt ready to take on whatever was inside the ancient danger. Inside were a bunch of flesh beasts. Fortunately, my superior moral fiber allowed me to convince them to stand down, and we were able to loot what was inside. There was a few advanced components and a tech print, not hugely useful, but what we were really after was the people inside the crypto sleep caskets. They didn't have the best loot either, but that was okay, because shortly after we got a quest to build a small building, and once we did that, we finally had enough honor to get a sidecast from the Empire. You'll see in a minute why this is such a big deal. In the meantime, let me tell you the game plan. The concept of a plan I was working with was to do as much research as quickly as possible, all while grinding out valuable contracts and investing everything I made into extremely volatile stocks. In the meantime, I also planned on getting robots set up to automate drug production. If there's one thing I've learned across my years of life experience, it's that selling drugs is good. But all of that had to take a back foot because right now we're both poor in wealth and poor in knowledge. So I'm gonna do you a massive favor that you can repay by subscribing, and skip forward to an appropriate time. Anyway, I've blue-balled you all for long enough. A group coming to siege down a colony have just appeared, so let's demonstrate why sidecasts are so powerful. What would have been a completely unwinnable fight was one with barely any resistance, solely because Goon can spam thunderbolts. Shortly after Goon acquired the ability to shoot lightning from his fingertips, I went to fight the Diabolus, first of the 3 bosses that we'd be fighting to fully upgrade our mechs. Thanks to the lightning, which mechanoids are extremely weak to, we took it down without much difficulty. After a little while longer, we had standard mech tech researched. This is a pretty big deal because it allows us to get the Tunneler, a mech which will mine for us. We're going to need this pretty desperately because our goals require a lot of steel. Following this minor victory, I accidentally fell into a coma and grinded out the game for 10 hours straight without stopping, blinking, or pissing. This resulted in a trip to the ER and a fully completed base. Before we started working on the grind, I wanted to create some additional mechanoids to help, some fabricors specifically. These things will be able to take some of the burden of creating things for contracts off our back, so we could focus on further research and profit development strategies. But to do that, we need to kill the War Queen. Normally that wouldn't be a huge issue because you could just split the War Queen's fire between multiple colonists, but we only had one guy, and that was Goon. With him taking the full brunt of the War Queen's fire, I wasn't sure if he'd be able to survive. Thankfully, I had a solution. A few hours beforehand, I had managed to pick up the invisibility sidecast from a merchant, allowing me to make Goon invisible for a few seconds. With that time, Goon could hopefully sneak up to the War Queen and begin to smite her with thunderbolts, hopefully killing her before she had a chance to react, and blow Goon's head off. All that was left to do was try it out. Shrimply. Too easy. With our new mechs made and ready to work, we were finally able to start work on the grind. We'd be researching while our fabricors created cheaply made slop that we could sell in foreign markets for exorbitant prices. Like a true businessman. Frankly though, I soon found that that was easier said than done. Most of the things people wanted we either couldn't make or hadn't researched yet, and even if we were able to make the things that people wanted, there wasn't any guarantee that they'd pay us very well, or that we'd be the ones to get the reward. And even if we did get the reward, it wouldn't fucking matter, because our dickhead banks take like a quarter of our earnings. At this rate, we were never going to become a millionaire, we were just going to go into immense debt. I had planned earlier on to start drug production and we never really got around to it, so since we've been planning on it, we started that, converting one of our greenhouses into a greenhouse, you know? Like weed. While our pot was growing, I decided to do something about the banks. The reason they were charging us so much was because they really didn't like us. I disliked the idea of sucking up to the banks to lower our rates, but I disliked the idea of paying 25% of our income even more. So either the banks had to die or we had to send them gifts. By an immensely slim margin, I decided to send the banks gifts. My plan for acquiring those gifts was simple. We'd displace indigenous people and steal their resources, like a true businessman. By that I mean, if we destroyed settlements that were enemies with the Civil Union and the Empire, we would raise our opinion, thereby lowering our banking premiums. To make killing innocents slightly easier, I decided to start researching a planetary shuttle, which would allow us to raid enemies 300% more efficiently. So I went to go raid some bases. It didn't go very well. After a couple of failed attempts, I came to a revelation. The shuttle had a pretty long range. So long, in fact, that I could skip the killing innocents part of the plan and go straight to the sending the banks money part. This solved one of our two issues. Now all we needed was more production. As our drug empire began to build itself, I turned my attention to something else. Killing the Apocryton. All things considered, the Apocryton is the easiest of the mech bosses. It can't really deal much damage on its own, and so long as you manage the ads, it dies pretty much without stress. We actually have an even better way to deal with it, which is the same strategy we used to kill the War Queen. It went down easily, but that wouldn't be the last we'd see of the Apocryton. After we killed it, I began to research Ultra Mech Tech, the final stage of mechanoid evolution. With it, we could theoretically build our own War Queen, but that wasn't why I was so interested in it. The real reason was the Mech Lord armor. To keep control over our mechs, we need bandwidth. Without enough, our mechs go rogue and start attacking us. Currently we had just under 20, and the Mech Lord armor would boost that well up into the 40s. With that extra bandwidth, we could further expand our drug empire and get well on our way to becoming a millionaire. During the construction process, I made something of a discovery. Okay. We have... Holy shit, we can take out 194,000 in loans. That means we really only have to get up to 800,000, because then we could take another 200,000 from the bank. That would be enough to push us over the edge. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's a good discovery. But just after that delightful realization, I was faced with something much more daunting. I haven't really been showing raids in this playthrough up until now because they've largely been manageable. Either they run into the turrets and die, or I'm able to get Goon out in front of them and put them down with lightning bolts. This raid was different. What the fuck is that? What the fuck is that? Just after that bullshit, a muffler went mad and beat my Fabricor to death. Just great. After getting all that sorted out, I withdrew most of our money, using it to buy implants for Goon. You might think that's a waste of our sweet, sweet cash, but the implants in Goon actually factor into the overall wealth, so it's not really much of a loss. Eventually, I finished researching the final tier of mech tech, and with a little bit of elbow grease, I was able to make the Mech Lord helmet, our final armor upgrade. That was lovely, but I was beginning to notice my profits dropping off quite substantially. The drug operation was making money, no doubt, but it was slow and honestly pretty expensive. I needed to diversify. But before we could deal with that, we had to fight an Impid raid, this one cut from much the same cloth as the last mech raid, as the Impids intended to breach our walls. This would be fine if they weren't attacking from two angles. Let's see how it went. That fucking sucked, but at the very least we finished our Mech Lord armor shortly after. And immediately after that I was faced with something of a deal with the devil, a deserter quest. By taking this deserter in and immediately banishing them so we don't fail the challenge, we would make the Empire an enemy. Normally this would mean certain death, but at this point our position was so fortified and Goon was so strong that I was completely confident we could take the Empire without major losses. And what would we get as a reward for making the Empire an enemy? Well, the Empire would start raiding us. Let me put that a different way. The Empire would start sending highly armored and extremely valuable troops to fight us that had little to no hope of winning. Essentially, by making the Empire an enemy, we'd acquired a new source of income that would balloon our wealth to an unreal degree. That being said, making the Empire an enemy wasn't all fun and games. I had a mod installed called Deserters, which revamped the deserter faction of the Empire and made the Empire significantly more aggressive if you made an enemy of them. Last I remember, the Empire was actually able to carpet bomb you if they felt like it, so this could go very wrong very quickly. Essentially, we were now walking a fine line between massive wealth and complete destruction, and the key to balancing it all out would be to not engage the Empire too much. At the very least, the strategy was working for the time being. We had made approximately $140,000 off of one attack, meaning that we'd need approximately 3 or 4 attacks of that caliber to complete the challenge, all else being completely ignored. This was such a monumental success that I decided to shelve all my other plans and just fortify our defenses for further Empire raids. We'll skip forward a little bit here. We'd fought a few raids since we betrayed the Empire, but none of them had been Empire raids. That being said, we had completed a bunch of contracts, enough to build a nice little nest egg of about 90,000 silver that we had sitting in our bank. Because of that nest egg, we were also able to take out a loan of 200,000 silver, putting us just barely 150,000 away from the million mark. That meant we'd need 1 or 2 good Empire raids to finally complete the challenge. That, or we could start construction on a side project. I hadn't thought about it earlier, but the shipbuilding mechanics from the new Odyssey DLC were quite lucrative. The ship was lucrative, I mean. If we could build a nice little grav ship, then that could very well skyrocket our wealth and give us a backup plan in case the Empire bombed us. So we got to construction, and before too long, the ship was complete. We were now less than 50,000 silver away from completing one of our 2 goals. With our wealth a mere few days away from reaching a million, I decided to set my sights on leaving the planet. So, we could have a climactic ending. And shortly after we set out to build the ship, we got 2 lucrative events. One, the Empire raided us, giving us about $100,000 worth of equipment on the spot, and we completed an extremely expensive contract, giving us the final amount we needed to clear the million. Now all that was left was to escape this shithole planet. We continued to build the ship up, making money all the while, until we got the blueprints for the ship down and were nearly ready to start the ship's reactor. Of course, once the reactor was started, we'd need to survive massive raids for the next 15 days. That would prove to be our greatest challenge. And after not too long, we began. It got off to a good start. We pushed back the first wave without even having to use psycasts, and the second without having to use psycasts too much. The third was where an issue I hadn't foreseen arose. Lag. I'd been using a number of lag reducing mods and settings within the game to keep lag to a minimum up to that point, but in the face of 30 mechanoids all exploding, it didn't matter and my game began to play more like a PowerPoint presentation than a game. To counter this, I began to use dev mode to delete bodies, and of course their loot, off the map. If you want to complain about this, feel free to do it down in the comments. I read them all. More urgently, Goon had got pretty badly injured in the mechanoid raid, and was thus at greater risk. I put him on Luciferum to prevent any permanent injuries, but his recovery was still slow. We'd have to take the next few days easy. The 4th, 5th, and 6th attacks all came and went without issue, but by the time the 6th was finished, I realized I had made a terrible miscalculation. It turns out I had actually built the ship wrong. That's right, for a ship to function, it needs all 3 of its engines connected to a structural beam. I hadn't done this. This meant that, unless I wanted to suffer an endless onslaught of raiders until either the ship finished construction or I died, I needed to rebuild the ship in less than a week, all while fending off the oncoming raiders. This was, very bad. Luckily, thanks to a passing trade ship, we managed to scrounge up the resources we needed to start construction on the ship. Now the question was how long would we be waiting? The next few raids came and went without issue. I was beginning to feel very confident about our chances of succeeding. That was until we reached raid 11. Close to the end, 3 forces of about 20 approached from 3 wildly different angles. They were all heavily armed. Let's see how it went. As I sent Goon to rest, the final day and the final raid began. And that is it. It has been, it's been real. This was honestly, this took a lot longer than I thought it would. Honestly, I thought it would take maybe like 2 weeks max to record and edit. It's taken me like a month and a bit, so apologies for that. But yeah, this has been fun. This has been fun. Odyssey is really fun, and you know, I'm a big fan of RimWorld, so I'm sure I'll end up doing more videos on this game in the future. But yeah, you guys have been great. I'll see you in the next one, and free Palestine, free Palestine, free Palestine, folks.